A fox knows many things, but a hedgehog knows one important thing. It's one important thing. It's one important thing.
Welcome to the Morning Hedgehog podcast, where we explore the business ideas that shape your success. Here are your hosts Ira Gardner and Glynns Thomas. We now join Glynns and Ira in progress.
Where do you fit in on this spectrum with your studio, Glynns?
That's exactly, I think, where I am. Is I do try to differentiate myself from the competition in terms of business headshots. And so what I do is I see a lot of headshot photographers who are all about speed. And so I think that's what a lot of customers think is important. And so I'm trying to change their minds to say, well, if you want, because I'm also hearing from certain segments out there that they're very concerned about how they look. And they might have complaints. Well, the last photographer, I was just in and out of here super fast, and I just never really felt that I didn't get any direction on posing, and I don't like how I look in the picture. So taking those comments that I get back and trying to come up with a solution and understanding that I need to be charging a good price for what I do, I'm trying to position myself as, I think one of the lines I have on my website is, some photographers, this is all about speed, but if your image matters, then I spend the time to do it well. So that's how I differentiate myself. That's how I say why I charge what I charge. And then I'm actually getting customers who also value that, which is great because I don't want to be about speed. I don't want to be that super high volume, get them in, get them out. But at the same time, I've been using what I've learned from the E-Myth Revisited to make sure that I have consistency of what I'm providing because I'm getting referred. And the people who are referring me, they want to make sure that whoever they send me to is going to get the same experience. They don't want to be embarrassed and I come in and do something totally different. So it has been really important to me to implement a system and process that's consistent so that I don't let anybody down, whether it's that new customer or whether it's that customer that referred me. So I do combine those two. And so it's really comforting to hear you say what you said. I didn't go into that because I knew that was a good thing to do. It's what I've evolved into. And that just gives me hope that I just need to continue to strengthen that.
Well, a couple things come to mind. What you will discover as you develop the business model is how important your life history, what an impact that has on how you develop your business model. And with your background, your professional background, you brought those traits with you and applied it to your studio. And one of the things I was so impressed with when I first met you is the fact that you're on point. You have a focused, you're a headshot and branding photographer. You're not advertising a lot of different things. You're staying really focused and really, really professional, and you're really good at your social media marketing. It's very impressive.
Thank you. And it didn't start out that way. I started out thinking I was going to do family and glamour, and I was going nowhere. And when I got this job to do these headshots, just a lot of light bulbs started to go out. And so I evolved into that, and I began to realize I belonged there for a lot of different reasons. My business background and just being really comfortable in the work environment, but it was a discovery process that I had to go through. And my first iterations of my website, thank goodness I didn't save any screenshots because they'd just be horrifying to look at. So this has been an evolution to really discover who I was always in the beginning. But also because of my background, I just want to share this with other people of why I came into really focusing into this. And that's from a different perspective. Because of my marketing background, I understand how much goes into marketing something. I understand how you can really do a deep dive into just one customer segment. Um, I know too much. I can be completely overwhelmed by it as a one person show. We had teams of people. When I worked at Wells Fargo, we had hundreds of people working on what I'm trying to do as one person right now. So knowing that, I knew that if I was going to try to successfully market a family photography business, a newborn photography business, a high school senior photography business, a headshot business, all those different genres, I was not going to do those very well. I wasn't, as a newer photographer, I wasn't going to be able to do those different types of photography very well. I mean, for me to switch gears into now I'm going to do this genre and now I'm going to do this genre the next day, for me, that was too difficult, at least in this earlier stage of my career. Maybe once I'm 30 years into it, I'll be able to switch those gears pretty easily. But also, like, how am I going to set up that website and those different pages or those different websites? Or how am I going to find those different audiences and start to market and how to network into it? That was just too much. So the more I started to specialize, the more success I'm having. Now, at the same time, when you get really focused, it's going to be slower because I'm just working in that particular space. So while I've had opportunities to do a family shoot, to do all these other different things that may have brought more money in initially, I think I would have been more mediocre in terms of what I was producing, but I wouldn't be able to take this opportunity to really grow the parts that I want to grow and become really good at it, to be really good at that particular type of art, to be really good at servicing those particular market segments that I want to service. So I've had the luxury to be able to do that, but I also understand that's it's just a different way of approaching it and being able to know that it will grow slower, but I think in the end, it will be, I will be much more successful and much more happy with what I have created because of that.
Wow, that was fantastic sharing. I really appreciate that. And I couldn't agree with you more. What's really interesting is I see a lot of portfolios of photographers getting ready to start out, and they have a little sampling of this, a little sampling of that, and they want to say yes to everything.
Mm-hmm.
And what's really interesting though is because they have a little bit of this, a little bit of that, they don't have a lot of confidence in any one of those areas. And so my advice is to, you know what, get a survival job and pick one of the areas that are most important to you to really do a deep dive. Spend the next 3 years doing nothing but that and get really good at it. And this gets to a question I often get asked, which is, how often do I update and modify my business plan? And one of the things that I always tell people is your business is a lot like a yacht race. You're sailing. You're going to tack in one direction for a while, and the winds are going to change, life's going to change, and then you're going to tack in another direction. And what I tell people is that I encourage you to specialize, find out what your it is, specialize in it, and get really good. Because when you get really good, then you get excited to share it with others and you're excited to market it. And the most important thing you can do is go out and share your work and ask for a job doing that work. And when you get really good at, in your case, you get really good at the headshots in the business market, you're excited to go talk to people. You want to talk to people because you feel really good about it because you've spent the time getting your expertise up to the level it needs to be. Now, 3 to 5 years, you might tack in another direction. Or when we talk about investing, we always talk about diversifying our portfolio. What I look at it is we're developing a model for a niche market, and we can then develop another niche market and add to our portfolio. But when we do that, we're going to spend all our energy going into that genre, becoming the best at that. And then you don't lose your skills that you acquired. You're never going to lose. And that's where I'm really blessed, and where I'm at in my career today is I don't advertise weddings, but I can do them. I don't advertise senior portraits, but there was a time when I did 200 senior portraits a year. I spent a lot of years. My first 5 years, I did product photography and industrial photography and hanging out of airplanes. I've got all those experiences that allow me to create a diverse portfolio of work, to where now I have assistants that I hire to help me with certain kinds of projects. I have video projects I do that I hire a team to work with me on that. When I do an event, a corporate event, I hire a different set of assistants. When I do a wedding, I hire a different set of assistants. I've gained all these experiences by focusing for extended periods of time and developing that business model out for each one of those. And that's why I describe myself as a serial entrepreneur. But it's put me in this really great place that I'm in right now, that I've never been happier.
That's excellent. And that's something that I've been appreciating, and well, I've been recognizing and appreciating more, which is, I wrote this as a note, so I'm going to make sure I find my note here, is really the idea of don't give up, because it's not easy. I don't think it's easy starting and running a business, but that's actually where the opportunity is, because we hear that most businesses fail within the first several years of running that business. And that's because they give up. And that's because it's really hard. But I think that what happens, and where a big part of the value of whatever business it is that you start and grow, is all those connections and experiences that you make over time. And so that it gets easier and easier and easier in some aspects. But it's because you know all these people that you can now hire these different teams that a brand new photographer would have no idea where even to go find those people. And that all those connections that you've made over the years then helped you to be exposed to any new areas that you want to go into. I mean, when I worked in the corporate environment, your value as an employee wasn't because of what you created and your ideas and the work that you did. It was who you knew within the organization, because the organization became massive. It was huge. And it was like, if you're sitting there with your boss and you had a problem, and they said, well, we don't know how to solve this problem, and I don't know who to contact for this. And if you could say, hey, I know so-and-so in the Concord office. I know that there are people, and I know I can go call that person. It was your connections and who you knew that you created along the path after being in it for years and years and years is what creates your success. So I find that as a challenge. I find that exciting, as all of us who are on this newer in this journey, is that I'm not going to give up, because I know it's going to happen, because of all those connections I'm making, because of all the experience that I'm going to have as I move forward. And that's going to mean just a snowball effect of continued success. At least I hope.
Well, and I'm gonna come at from a slightly different angle, and I'm gonna say something really bold right now. And I'm gonna say, don't give up, because failure is shaping your success. Because each time we go through a failure, we are learning about ourselves, and the reason it failed is because it wasn't the right fit. And we need to retool, readjust, and we will fail our way into success
Yes.
by being shaped and moved into the direction that we were meant to be in,
Yes.
based upon who we are at a core level of our being. We haven't even gotten to that part of
Right.
the business model. So don't give up. Remain inquisitive, remain observant, and know, wait a sec. For example, I've failed many times and I've struggled. I remember having a car break down and I couldn't afford the repair and I had to take the bus everywhere. And I still had to generate work. And, it taught me a lot of humility, and it taught me a lot of grit and perseverance. There's no hero without adversity. So I love the fact that you're encouraging us not to give up. But I also know that the more I got to know myself, I started to figure out why I was failing. And I started developing the business model to support that part of me that Michael Gerber talks about. We have to have the technician, the manager, and the entrepreneur. And in my case, I'm much more the entrepreneur than I am the technician. And I need to know that about myself so I can find a better balance. I either need to hire assistants. This is why I hire more assistants, because they keep me at my best at doing my strengths. That's why I use some of the automation I do for appointment scheduling, and why I'm so appreciative of Sarah, my wife, who is always checking in with me about my calendar and saying, do you need me to put that on your calendar? Because I live by the calendar. Part of the business model is going to be about identifying our strengths and figuring out the systems that we need to put into place to overcome our weaknesses. And so let's keep in touch with those failures as a positive thing.
Excellent. What was I thinking? We're not really putting a time frame on us. I don't know if we want to do that in the future, but I do like how we are, there's somewhat of a, like you put together the PowerPoint, so that is helpful to go through. So we have that structure, but at the same time, we have all that free flow in there too, which I think people are going to appreciate. And I was thinking, I like how we're interspersing bits of motivation, because I think that it will be too dry for some people, too academic. So just keeping that what the realistic feelings that people are going through in this, and then just keeping that motivation. I mean, I got into this when I started watching the Sue Bryce start up your studio, and I went through that twice. Have you watched her videos or at all? Or you?
I've been a huge Sue Bryce fan for a long time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now she gets up on her soapbox every single time, and every single one ends up with her, crying at the end, and just really. But I do not suggest we do that. But I think
no, because I can start choking up right now just thinking about the fact that I have a former student who she is the best wedding photographer in our community, hands down. She's a luxury boutique business. And when I first met her, she had just moved to the United States from Taiwan.
Oh.
And she commuted over an hour and a half each way to come take classes. And she's spoken to groups of my students before, where she always tells the story about the fact that she wanted to quit after a week in my classes. She felt so overwhelmed she wanted to quit, but she was glad she didn't.
Yes.
And she went on to just do an amazing thing. But she did a presentation about how do you pack your life into one suitcase, because that's all she had to bring with her.
Chills.
Yeah. And so if you want to go there and talk about motivation, there we can go there, but it's
I think it's important to intersperse that throughout to keep our audience wanting to keep coming back. So I just think that, just making sure we throw that in there every once in a while would be good.
Yeah. And I want to stay in touch with the humility of my past failures and my challenges and times when I was broke, because it's not an easy road.
Right. Yeah. And it's because, so people where I am, I'll see that spreadsheet that says $250,000 a year. And I'm like, and you start to get down on yourself, right? So I think it's important to remind people that, and I've been looking around going, because I've seen the benchmark studies, and for a while there, I was just like, I'm not there yet. And it really bums you out. But I was having to realize, in that benchmark survey, they were only interviewing people who, I think, were at a certain level, at a certain amount of success. It was just trying to see what are successful photographers doing. And in the little bit of research I've been able to do on my own, I found this really depressing statistic saying the average photographer in the US makes $34,000 a year. So, but I think it's important to just be cognizant that we don't want to make people feel bad and want to quit because they're not there yet, and to understand you're not going to be there out of the gate. And that, but at the same time, I don't want to throw out that 34,000, because I think that starts making people feel complacent and going, oh, that then I'm okay. So I think there needs to be that motivation and that inspiration, but at the same time, not making people feel like I'm never going to get there.
Well, I think, there are, in my opinion, there are generally two types of people that go into the photography business. There are the people like me that was, young and ignorance was bliss, and you don't know any better, and you go through it, and you go through, I have a PhD in hard knocks, and it takes a long time. The second category are people that have experienced great success in a different vocation, who then enter into the photography world with this incredible background of experience that they are then able to refocus and apply into their photography business. And what's interesting about that is successful people will be successful in whatever they choose to do, because they have a frame of how to look at it in a way that brings them success. I mean, I think about some of the most successful photographers were successful before they ever entered the industry. Howard Schatz is this fine art photographer. He's down in the Bay Area, as I recall. He has a home in San Francisco and he has a home in New York. And he built a custom swimming pool that it was acrylic that he could photograph through and do these incredible images underwater. He's like extremely well known. And what's interesting to me is he was a successful eye surgeon who left the medical industry to become a photographer. And when you hear people say, wait, why do you want to be a photographer? And I always ask, show of hands, how many of you have been told that you can't make money in photography? Everyone raises the hand. Their friends and family question it. Why would you go into this field? You can't make any money. And they're looking at the Craigslist ads and they're looking at all these things. And I'm like, well, wait a sec. How can somebody that was making really good money as an eye surgeon can enter in and choose to become a photographer and be even more successful? And I often think it's because successful people aren't afraid to dream big. And they have bigger dreams. And if you missed, you're still going to miss on the side of success. And I think that so many of us, that if they're just starting out and they haven't maintained that survival job and they're just under this enormous amount of pressure, they're going to make some mistakes along the way, and they're going to question and doubt and beat themselves up. Whereas I think of another photographer I met him a few years ago. He was a corporate attorney in Seattle, who left that career and became a fine art environmental photographer. And he has been more successful. And people say, how do you make money in fine art? And yet he's made more money doing that than he did in his corporate law firm. And so that's why this podcast is important to me, is to help people develop the mindset
Right.
will empower them to be successful.
I think it's also like, I think the issue is that the media tells us that success is pretty easy to come by. And that when you look at all the marketing stuff out there, there are all these just little tips. They're just small tips and small ideas, which is why I teach the class that I teach, which is like, you need to put it all into a plan.
Mm-hmm.
And they all need to work together in synergy. And everyone thinks, if I can just find that one marketing idea that's just going to give me a ton of business, then I'm set. No, that's not how it works. And I think the idea is also in terms of business, and the photographers out there who are selling education, a lot of them talk about how they were able to get success in a very quick amount of time. So I think it's misleading that people think it's going to happen in 6 months. It's going to happen in their first year. And so I think that managing those expectations for people is important. But I really love the idea that you talked about people who had a success in other places, because two things came to mind. One, Sue Bryce used to always say the people who struggle the most in photography are those who have always worked for somebody else and have always been supported. And I think that's where I was coming from. And so it really has been a huge mind shift to go from corporate into entrepreneurial. But I also reminded me of an article that I read years ago about people who who are wealthy, extremely wealthy, and lost it all, and what happened. And this was because my husband is a childhood friend of somebody in England who was among England's top 500 wealthiest people, something like that. And he lost it all. And I found this article and we sent it to him that said, people who were born into money and lose their money tend to not be able to recuperate. But people who made their money, lost it, are much more likely to then find a new way to make that money. And that's what he's been doing. He started making money, making CDs and getting the rights to make CDs by country. So, there's that little country code on it.
Yeah.
That he could then
the region code. Yeah.
The region code. So he would get the rights to do that. And then his partner, who was more the technical guy, I don't know the whole real story, but I get the sense that he kind of stabbed him in the back and helped this Japanese firm sue him, and the whole entire business collapsed, and it was just gone. And he actually owns this, or used to own this huge, beautiful piece of property that we went to stay at once in England, that he then rented to Angelina Jolie when she was filming Tomb Raider.
Oh, nice.
And he always gets a giggle when he went to go drop off the keys and she opened up the door and she was in like this full-on leather cat suit, and he just started giggling. But he ended up selling that house to her, and he had to give that up to move into something much more modest until he built up new businesses. But yeah, it was a really trying time for him and his family for him to really figure out what he was going to do after that. But he was able to do that because he was successful before.
Well, I'm going back to where you started on this, which is this, too many people have an expectation that there's instant gratification.
Yes.
and instant success. And I think we've seen too many of the online dating apps where, it's just supposed to be an instant
Yes.
match and an instant
Right.
hookup.
Right.
And it's not that way. And I guess, to me, part of what I'm trying to do is you're right. Create the expectation that it's a journey, not a destination, and that there's a lot of pieces to it. And that I think too many people start out before they should.
Yeah.
They go into it and then they have blinders on because they're panicked. How am I going to pay the bills? And then you also touched on that idea of um, the impact of family of origin and whether you've been around other entrepreneurs. And I think of the mentorship. And I'm going to share with you my most prized personal possession. Uh, this is a calendar plate that was made in 1910, and it belonged to Ira W. Gardner the second. So I'm the fifth Ira W. Gardner, although the middle name changed. And he made this he had a little general store in the middle of nowhere, North Dakota, and had these plates made. And what's interesting about this plate is that the store burned down before 1910. He had ordered these plates to be able to give out at the holidays, and the store burned down. They lost everything and ended up rebuilding and moving out west. And that's how my family ended up out west. But it was my grandfather's father. My grandfather worked for himself his whole career. My father worked for himself for the majority of his career. And so I kind of grew up with this expectation of, well, you just figure it out. You just go do it. But I wish I had had this sort of map and compass, if you will, to get there a little bit more directly, or a little bit more. I wish I had had somebody questioning me along the way, so I could have figured out who I was a little bit sooner. And I guess that's
Yeah.
why I really advocate to try to help people figure that out sooner than later.
I think we're both on the same page about this, but just I see too many photographers as well as other industries just throw out these spammy like advertising and emails. I'm getting one from some other photographer right now. I don't know how I got on his email distribution list, but just it's like, I forget what they say, but we'll show you the 5 secrets that will propel your business to skyrocket. You won't know what to do with yourself with all this money that's coming in. And it drives me nuts. And I don't want to be that. I want to be a real, and I know that's what you do, but
Yeah.
Preaching to the choir, but it's like, I want to be the real truth and process of how the vast majority of us get to where we want to go, and not the super rare instances where people just are super successful. And I think even those, there's no way they were, in order to have tremendous success, you still had to have a lot of knowledge and understanding and experience. And maybe it came from someplace else, because you can't accept that amount of business without knowing what to do with it and to be able to deliver it. So I just, that's
Well,
what I love about it.
those ads usually come with the results vary, because I firmly believe that any sort of foolproof system says, I was successful, just do what I did.
Right.
And I think that's a recipe for disaster, because the part they're not telling you is, well, do what I do, but actually they're not describing the process they went to get there and the questions they had to answer for themselves. And, oh, by the way, no two people have the exact same personality to be able to pull it off in the same exact way.
Right.
And I,
This will be a great podcast, this subject right here.
yeah, yeah.
This would be a really great discussion to have. I don't hear anyone talking about this other than like the closest I've heard is on the business challenge, where they said, Angela has said, we don't want to tell you how you're going to do your business. We want to encourage you to become lifelong learners of entrepreneurism, and so that you're always questioning. And I think that's what we're talking about here.
Yeah, and I think the people that are successful, they're successful because they're distinctive. They stand out and they're consistent, and you like them, and there's the expression of a new customer has to know you, like you, and then choose you.
Right.
They have to know you, like you, and trust you. Yeah. And so if you're just like somebody else, if you're somebody's Siamese twin, how am I going to trust that?
Right.
I need to see you. And so, yeah, it's going to be fun. What do we want to do for next up?
Thank you for listening to the Morning Hedgehog podcast. For show notes or to submit a question or comment, please visit www.themorninghedgehog.com.